Sex, sex and power. Sex, sex and power.
Welcome to the Sex and Power podcast. Real talk at the intersections of sex, power, oppression, and liberation. I'm your host, JANICEselbie. My guest today is Kiki Bryant, who is known across platforms as Uppity Negress, a brilliant, incisive voice on race, feminism, religion, and culture. She is also an entrepreneur and creator. Welcome, Kiki. I'm so glad you could join me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Janice. This is such a pleasure.
And I'm speaking with you from Canada, from the unceded traditional territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And you're joining me from the United States. I don't know if you're comfortable saying where you are in the United States, or we can just
Yes, absolutely. I am a Chicagoan, and we are not shy about letting everybody know that. I am a bit biased. I do think that Chicago is one of the best cities in the world. I've tried to live in not Chicago, and I always find my way back here because even other major cities are just letdowns in comparison. We really have it all here. And then we have a large open lakefront, which I didn't realize is so special and unique to Chicago until I went other places. And a lot of their like lake space is privatized. And so, we got a lot of great stuff going on here in Chicago. So yes, everybody in Chicago, I'm from
I love it.
and I love it.
That's so great. I wonder if you would set the stage for us today by telling a little bit about how you got from where you started out, the situation, childhood you grew up in, to where you are now with such a strong and powerful voice. So, yeah, tell us a little bit about childhood. What was life like for you growing up?
Yeah, so I actually had a very not great childhood. My mother, she was an addict, and my family in general for generations is, deeply impacted by the war on drugs and all of the sort of ways that those policies infected, like mass incarceration, criminalizing drug users versus drug dealers. But I had family impacted on both sides. And so most of my childhood, I kind of raised myself. My mother was a sex worker and she was murdered when I was 13.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
She was murdered when I was 13, but I had been raising myself before that, kind of in a multi-generational home, but nobody was really parenting me besides myself. So I was able to avoid going into the official foster care system. But even as a child, I kind of recognized that, one, the environment I was growing up in was not providing me the care that I needed. And two, if I was going to have something different, I would need to do something about it. And so me, as an 11-year-old child, I forged my great-grandmother's signatures on forms to send me to a residential living scholarship program. And I got the scholarship because I was smart. And at that point, they did physically need to see an adult. And so I had an aunt that signed the rest of the papers. And that was just kind of the beginning of me shifting my environment and, getting, not only the standard care that I needed in terms of like water and food and, clothes and all of that, but also mental health care, which I think was a huge thing. But because it was more of a scholarship program, what they also quickly realized was that I had a lot more trauma that they were not prepared for. And so I was there for about 3 years before they sent me back home for a behavioral issues. And once I was back home, I still wasn't officially a foster kid, even though I still identify that way. Like I never was a part of DCFS is what it is in Chicago. But I always operated kind of as an orphan, and I was always really connected to the people I met in the group home. Even to this day, one of my friends that I met in that group home is my best friend. Like, we see each other all the time. She bought a house down the street from me, and we call each other.
Right.
If anybody asks who we are, she's my foster sister. And I, like a lot of other young girls and even young men who are in the foster care system or, the uncared for child system or adjacent, I engaged in survival sex work. And there is a direct pipeline from people who are foster children to survival sex work or to being trafficked. So many of the foster kids that disappear are being trafficked. And it's a real problem. Now, I was fortunate because I was able to engage in a way that gave me what I needed, and also did not have me exploited. But I have known a lot of people that did not have those luxuries. And so I kind of credit that to me having sort of a natural level of intelligence, that is just not common. And so I was able to, even within those dynamics, find a way to make it for me, to do it with the ways that I needed to, and then to get out and do something better. So, the combination of all of those experiences just kind of gave me a different perspective on a lot of things, but especially sex work. And so that is a little bit about kind of my most formative childhood experiences, I guess, when it comes to sexuality. I did marry young, mostly because it was a steady thing, which isn't to say I didn't love my ex-husband, but at the time I needed love and I needed safety and stability, and he was those things.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we married young, we had my daughter young, and then we quickly outgrew each other because we were young. and that's, I feel like that would have been the story even if all of the other factors weren't at play. But the combination of all of those experiences has really made me who I am as a person, and also made me view the world itself at large in a different way. Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible story of survival, tenacity, resilience. I love that you forged the signature when you were 11. I had a similar experience of forging a signature also to try and get myself into a better situation. So I love that you had the courage to do that. And then it is heartbreaking that after a few years, you weren't able to stay anymore. Obviously, trauma does impact and influence um, behaviors and reactions. So then I'm curious because you also are wonderfully outspoken about religion. So would you tell us a little bit about that? How religion influenced your life and kind of what got you to the place that you're at now with just being so honest about it all?
Yeah. So, as I've mentioned, as a child, I was just kind of left to my own devices a lot, and my family actually has, like my great uncle, so my great grandmother's brother and his sons, and that whole line of the family, they are pastors. They have a church even to this day. And it is in Chicago.
Wow.
I'm not going to give, specific details about it, but, my family is very religious. And, I grew up going to church every Sunday. At the time, my family owned a church that was under the railroad tracks on 63rd and Carpenter. If you're a Chicago person, you've probably been past it and you know exactly what little building I'm talking about. And it was just a little shack, and it was just mostly a bunch of their friends that had immigrated up with them from Mississippi, and then their family and their friends as it grew. And so I grew up very deep in church, but going back to me having sort of an unnatural level of intelligence for my age at all times, having a lot of time to my own devices, needing something to do, being curious, one of the only books in my house was the Bible. And it was always the biggest book, and it was always the most readily available one. And so I would sit and I would read the Bible, you know? We did have encyclopedias, and so I read those too. But, the Bible was always the most interesting thing to me because I didn't go to encyclopedia camp every Sunday, but we went to Sunday school. And so I would read the Bible, and having family members that were clergy, I'd be like, hey, I have a question about this here. In this part, it says that, but in this other part, it says this. And these things directly conflict, but God is perfect. Make that make sense to me. And I'm very young doing this. And, I would either get a non-answer or a bunch of deflection or just basically be told essentially God works in mysterious ways and we shouldn't question. And those answers were never satisfying to me. Because, you can't tell me God makes no mistakes when I just found a direct contradiction in what is supposed to be exactly his word. And so even at a young age, I came to the conclusion that I don't think Christianity is it. Because again, there's just too much that one, I know I don't jive with, like, maybe fathers don't own their daughters and shouldn't sell them. And maybe that's not, I feel like an omnipotent God would know that that's not a cool thing to do at any time. If he's all knowing and all powerful and last all time, then things that he says are okay now should always be okay. And so from a young age, I decided that I thought Christianity was bullshit, at least because it just logically, rationally, as a rational being, did not make sense to me. Okay. But I was like, but everybody is invested in this God thing. So maybe there's something else out there. And so I went searching. I tried to find the truth of God in a bunch of different religions. And no matter where I searched, all I found was that the only thing valuable in religion was community. And I think there's something valid in that having a group of people that are committed to being in the same space and connecting with each other over something, there's something beautiful about that. And as an atheist, I do miss that sometimes, to the point that I have thought about like making atheist fellowship centers where we do that. And it's just focused on personal growth, like maybe seminars, like not culty, but just a gathering space or community space. Because I don't think that exists unless it's for children's or centered around sports, which is just a different kind of like community bonding, because sports can get a little culty too sometimes.
That's so true.
So that is the only value that I have found in religion. I've never found any of it that I felt to be true. And I looked for a long time because growing up religious, it's God, 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 God. But I just couldn't find it. And as a person who is fundamentally a rational, logical being, I just had to let it go.
Yeah. Did that create any rifts between you and family members, or did you kind of keep it under wraps that you didn't believe, so you're still going to keep going to the church with them on Sunday, but you're just recognizing that it's not all it's cracked up to be?
Yeah, so I did stop going to church. I never had any official conversations with family on, I don't believe in God or I'm not doing this. And all of my family funerals are still religious, which annoys me because I hate that Black funerals, first of all, seem to be so much longer than everybody else's funerals. And then I have to sit there for 3 hours to this guy trying to make me afraid enough of hell to come to his church next week, is what the experience feels like to me. I do have family sometimes. They'll still invite me to their church events and I'll just tell them, hey, I'm just really not into church anymore, And I will say, for all of the faults that my family did have, which I attribute most of that to just not having resources and ignorance and, being limited in capacity themselves, from just the experience of what it was for us, experiencing extreme poverty, that, they are fairly progressive. For example, my great grandparents had 5 children. My great grandma was born in 1931. My great grandpa was born in 1929. Of their 5 children, 3 were gay. And that was just not a big
Oh,
deal for them.
wow.
Not a big deal in our family. Very Southern Baptist, very devout. Never made anybody in my family feel weird about being queer. You know?
It's fantastic.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of room for us to explore ourselves without judgment, which is, and if I did believe in God, I don't believe in God. What I will say is, as a person who does not believe in God, my great grandmother was the closest example of something that I would say is Christ-like. She was such a loving, kind, compassionate person. And if there was ever such a person that lived their life in the way that the book says you should, it was her. She would give someone a shirt off her back. We had negative resources sometimes, like the kind of family where SNAP would run out in the middle of the month and we would be scrounging for every single meal. And she would still find room in our house for someone who was hungry and needed a place to sleep.
It's powerful. That's a powerful example.
She gave like free childcare to all of the struggling single mothers in our community. She raised my entire community. Our home was the base for our community. And mind you, like when I think of my childhood and I contextualize it, because obviously I did have a lot of experiences that were not great. My great grandparents really did what they could with what they had, and dealing with a lot of trauma and managing a lot of other people's problems. And, for what they had, they did the best that they could. And, like I said, the closest thing to Christ-like that I have ever seen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm very glad that she was part of your life to be that example for you. And I mean, whether someone is that way because they think that's what their religion, that's how their religion tells them to behave, or whether someone is an atheist, secular humanist, and just wants to help better their society by behaving in a loving manner to other people, and there's no supernatural anything about it. They're just doing it because they're a good human and they want to see other humans prosper and succeed. That's
Absolutely.
so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. What about the fact in patriarchal religion, so any of the Abrahamic religions, there's such a stark divide between how you're treated if you have a uterus or if you have a penis. And that's just, I mean, that still drives me crazy. Was that something that was glaringly obvious to you as well when you were, seeing the family involved in the church and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, absolutely. So my family did very much so believe in gender roles, which I think is, especially when it came to divisions of domestic labor, right? But what I found interesting is, being a modern Black family, our family structures ended up like a lot of them, where it is single mothers who are doing most of the breadwinning, even if they have a male partner or they're cohabitating. And so I always found that inherently contradictory, especially as a Black woman. But with my grandparents specifically, my grandmother never had to work. Uh, now, by the time I came around, they were already retired. And, they were retired and they had already had their grown children out of the house, and they were now raising their grandchildren and great grandchildren somehow. And so, it's not necessarily that gender roles, put them in the financial position that they were in, with us being incredibly poor. It was just more that caring for your own 5 children is a bit different than caring for their 30 descendants.
Wow.
And so I don't think that they prepared for that. But the girls would cook and clean and the boys would take out the trash and then basically do whatever else they wanted to, because there was not very many other things around our house that the boys were responsible for that wasn't just considered my great grandfather's job, like mowing the lawn or whatever. And so that always seemed unfair to me, especially as one of the older girls. I was very adultified from a young age. And so a lot of the care of, my younger cousins was put on me. My aunts and stuff were off working. And so it was just mostly a bunch of the kids home with my great grandparents. And, they're old. They need help. I'm older. I'm smart. I'm a girl. So naturally, a lot of those things became my job. And I always thought it was a little bit unfair that so much of those responsibilities were thrust on me. And I do, as a parent now, actively work to make sure that I am not adultifying my daughter. I'm sorry, my child. My child identifies as gender fluid. Blah, blah, blah. I do now work as a mother to make sure that I'm not adultifying my child, and just making sure that all of the things that I hated about my childhood, I'm intentional about not repeating.
Oh, that's great. And so that includes avoiding religious indoctrination.
Absolutely. My ex-husband, he is Christian, but not non-practicing. His grandmother, so my child's great grandmother on his side, was really religious and would keep televangelists and whatnot in the background. And so my child has had lots of exposure to Christianity and religion, but because no one has ever been like, this is the one sole truth. My kid also identifies as atheist. I remember there was a time when my kid is 3 or 4, and my kid is playing by themselves, like cops and robbers with dolls. And one of the dolls was Jesus. And so, to even from, if you don't raise kids to believe in religion, it just all seems like myths. When I was a kid, I really loved Greek mythology. And I feel like that's how my kid contextualizes Christianity.
Beautiful. Perfect. That's exactly right. I really do think it's recycled mythology, but it has such an impact, and particularly in the United States with what we see going on there now, with the rise of Christian nationalism. I've had the pleasure and the privilege of interviewing Jeremiah Kamara, who's a filmmaker in the United States, a documentarian. And he did a series on YouTube called Slave Sermons. And he is very interested about.
I feel like I've seen his work.
Yeah, you've seen his work. Okay, yeah, Holy Hierarchy is one of his films, and he really talks about how frustrating he finds it that the Black church even exists, in as much as Christianity being implemented to keep. Oh God, I don't even want to say it, but people who were enslaved to try and keep them in line, all these.
Yeah.
It's so horrifying.
It frustrates me as a Black person, but it also frustrates me as a woman, right? Because the same can be said for women who are, because patriarchal religions also subjugate women. There's no physical, logical reason that I, as a woman who lives in a country that is not a theocracy or isn't supposed to be, should be having arguments about whether or not I should be able to have an abortion, because we don't know if God thinks that a fetus is a child and if it's murder. Who gives a figgity fuck what your God says? That is your imaginary friend, and you can listen to what you think he might have said, but you cannot force me to do it. And it does frustrate me as both a Black person and a woman, because it's not like people are unaware, right? So we're at a stage where people are aware of the origins of why these things were forced on us, how damaging they are, the effect it has on society and the world around us, the effects that it has on us internally, on our growth, on our development, on our personal growth. And they're just like, okay, yes, this is sexist, but let's just cherry pick these good parts. And the cognitive dissonance associated with just not being able to let Christianity go really frustrates me. And some of that is because I am a rational, free thinking person. But I feel like a lot of that, most of it probably, is also because I am just autistic AF. And it's like, bro, you see it, just put it down. Like, and, I was part of a series called God Talk with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History, Culture. And I was, one of the atheist representatives. And I was talking about on stage how I grew up super religious, but I had to let it go because it didn't make sense. And comes a certain point where you are making the act choice to hold on to something that doesn't make sense. And I just could not do that. I just felt like it was not a worthwhile thing to do because I didn't see enough of the positive in what religion was supposed to offer. So I believe in something, or pretend to believe in something, that I think is nonsense for the rest of my life. And then maybe kind of sort of I'll go to a heaven that may or may not exist. And that is supposed to be worth women who are having miscarriages, possibly hemorrhaging and dying because they live in a state with a heartbeat law.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. The injustice of it all is so hard to stomach. And I recently was able to interview Professor Steve Michael Collins, and his book is The Anti-Civil Rights Movement: Affirmative Action as Wedge and Weapon. And Professor Collins made the point of how the Black church really was instrumental in pushing forward the civil rights movement. And that is absolutely true. That is fact. And yet we also have this conflicting problem there of the injustices and how women are treated, even in the church. Yes.
But even in the role that churches played in the civil rights movement, you have to consider that part of the reason why it was safe for us to do that is because our oppressors love the fact that we go to church every Sunday. They want us to do that. And so, yes, it was an act of resistance to do that in a way that allowed us to organize for ourselves. But ignoring that, we've always done that, even in the church kind of sessions or whatever that our slave masters run. We would secretly use that as, a means to gather, even through hyper surveillance, to figure out how do we get out of this, And so my counter to that is always, yes, it's great, but could we have also literally done this anywhere else that a bunch of us were allowed to gather in peace? And then also we have to kind of reckon with the idea that it also puts us in a position where a lot of the civil rights leaders were pastors. which can be good. But when I compare that to the fact that as a child, my first exposure to Rod Blagojevich, who was a corrupt politician, was because he came to my church.
No.
He came to my church to campaign. And convince a bunch of Black people to vote for him because he was going to do such great things from us. And then he stole a whole bunch of money from programs that would have really benefited us. And so it's a double-edged sword to give that kind of political influence to religious people. And of course, we're seeing that play out through Christian nationalism. I do think that there should be separation of church and state, because I do think that churches and religious thought should not be included in politics, period. The place for your church, your in your religion, is your heart and your mind and your place of worship. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And any place outside of what is personal to you, or to even a group of people that decided that they're a community, that's it. And when it starts being able to have influence on people that are not you, or the people who do not believe what you believe, perhaps it's time for you to not have that level of influence. I honestly think that any church or religious belief system or religion that is actively engaging in politics should be taxed.
Oh, yeah.
You're a fucking lobbyist, just like any of these for-profit companies, and you should be taxed.
Wow, and religious people really don't like that.
You don't get to have it both ways.
Wow. Yeah, I'm grateful to hear you say it so plainly. And I know that I get pushback online when I make statements like that. You I think, are far more just forthcoming, really straightforward, saying things that need to be said. How do you handle it when you get negative pushback? I mean, even the name that you've chosen for yourself, Uppity Negress, it's so powerful. I love it. How did you land on it? And then, how do you handle people who are not wishing you well? Put it that way.
So I am aware by nature of being who I am. I am Black. I am a woman. I am queer. I am disabled. I am atheist. And so pretty much everything about me as a person, as an identity, is in some way counterculture. And so by nature of just existing in who I am, somebody doesn't agree with me, and they disagree very strongly. But despite that, I've managed to amass a lot of visibility just for my thoughts. I chose the name Uppity Negress just because it's just been my experience that people have a certain idea in their mind, in their space, of their perception of what a person who is like me is supposed to be like, the amount of space we're supposed to take up, what we're supposed to sound like, and where we are supposed to be on sort of socioeconomic strata. Uppity Negress was a slur for Black women who they felt were behaving above their station. And I am always going to think of myself in a way that is very different from people who are sexist and racist and homophobic, or, where they think I should be, how they think I should feel about myself. And so that's why I have reclaimed that name for myself, because I am uppity. You think I should feel like shit about myself. You feel like I should, defer to you. You feel like you are above me. And bitch, you're not.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, excellent. Do you feel like you get more pushback from women or from men, or it's kind of equal across the board?
It's kind of equal because you would be surprised how many women are just as upset about the fact that I do not make myself small. I do not make myself submissive. I, don't let anybody bully or manipulate me. I question these kind of deeply held cultural mores and ideas. I have, on my pages, I have a little sort of introduction to myself just so people know what they're getting themselves into. And I say I am unapologetic, undoctrinated, unreverent, which was, people people like that. And I like the unreverent because one, I'm making language my own, which I love to do,
Mhm.
making up words, or finding ways to describe things that no one is coined a term for. Like when I coined
Mhm.
the term labor diggers to describe a certain kind of man. Um, you know,
That is great.
there's certain things in our society that we are told we're supposed to have automatic reverence for, and that we are told we're not supposed to question. And I don't really subscribe to that, you know? Uh, uh, I'm a Black woman atheist, and that tells you everything you need to know about, because Black women are the most religious people in the country, you know?
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
Black people in general are the most religious by race, but Black women by race and gender are the most religious people in this country.
It has to be part of the community that you mentioned earlier. That is such a massive draw for people. And the church has an ability to mobilize that hasn't been repeatable anywhere else. Really, the military is the only other community that comes close because they are brothers and sisters in arms. They are expected to protect each other in the line of fire. They eat together, they sing together. So there's some similarities there, in the bonding, in the way the bonding occurs as happens in church, and they're acting for something greater than themselves. Or that's how they see it.
I also think that when it comes to Black women, so much of the draw is actually just shame. Like, existing in a world that tells you at all times you are too much, and at all times you are doing something wrong, and at all times you have something to repent for. And look, we have a safe space for you to do that, and you can learn to be better. Black culture is, in my opinion, even more male centric than white culture.
Wow.
I have a friend who is a feminist scholar. Her name is Kathy Henry, and she made a quote once, and she and she said it very plainly: in the Black community, dick is God. And she's
Oh,
not
wow.
wrong, especially since, the war on drugs, and this idea of the scarcity of Black men. So much of what Black women are told is, if Black men are failing, it's your fault. And if you lack one, it's because you're not enough, or because you're too much. And in either direction, church is the answer. And, with single motherhood being so moralized, a lot of women hold shame about that. And certainly online discourse is constantly feeding that to Black women in particular. And so, unfortunately, so much of the draw for Black women in church is internalized shame, sexism, and male centricity.
Wow. Ooh, and so your scholar friend is called Kathy Henry.
Yeah, her name is Kathy Henry, and she doesn't like publish or anything. She's kind of like me, where she just kind of top of mind. These are my thoughts on my experience as a Black woman. And I think her Facebook page is now private. Like, she doesn't publish anything personally, but she published that back when she was public, and probably like 10 years ago. And it left such an impression on me in my younger mind, because that 10 years ago I was 24, and seeing that and thinking about it, like, damn, she's not wrong. Uh,
Mhm.
and so,
Mhm.
yeah, Kathy is good people, and she's also from Chicago. So,
Wonderful. Well, I'm just taking a look at some of my questions here. I'm really
And I don't have to get to
appreciating this.
and I don't have to get to work after this, and so we can go longer than the hour we had.
Okay, thank you. Um, okay, so one thing I'm wondering about is how would you define resistance? So not just as a protest, but as a daily practice. It already sounds like, from what you said, simply existing as a Black woman who is an atheist and who is queer, um, surviving and certainly thriving is an act of resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that my existence a lot of times just feels like an act of resistance. But the biggest act of resistance I would say that I have participated in is healing. It's healing. I have had a lot of therapy. uh, a lot of therapy, and the hard work of that therapy, or not, I wouldn't even say the hard work of the therapy, because I have had, back when I was religious, I went to religious counseling for my trauma, and it was obviously not helpful. It didn't get me anywhere, except into a deeper place of like shame and self-blame. Um, when I really started doing the work to understand the world around me, um, that's the thing that I think ultimately brought me healing, is because, a lot of people say that ignorance is bliss, but I think that ignorance is not. I think that it's very frustrating to be a person existing within a society where you are constantly in some way under attack and you don't understand how or why you feel this way. Like, for example, I was angry for a long, long, long time about my childhood, right? But understanding the war on drugs and why my mother could not be there for me in the way that I wish that she had, and why my grandparents didn't have, the resources that they needed, that helped me heal in a way that just like normal therapy wouldn't. And so for me, understanding society at large in the way that these sort of larger forces impacted my personal experience was very healing. And so the combination of knowledge, really sitting with what that knowledge means instead of just letting it pass through like a sieve, um, was the thing that was the most healing to me. And I think that we're seeing that pop up now in therapy. Like, maybe you're overwhelmed right now because you're depressed. Or maybe you're overwhelmed because the fucking world is on fire. And let's talk about what that means. Maybe you are experiencing a natural, like, maybe you are experiencing a natural human response to fascism.
Mhm,
you know,
mhm,
maybe some of the stuff that you're experiencing is just genuinely not okay. And your response to that is the response you should have. Like,
mhm,
I see a lot of pop psych on the internet sometimes where they're like, you are responsible for how you respond to things. And on some level, that's true, right? But a person who is like, if I walk up and I punch you in the face and your response to that is to say, ow, bro, what the fuck? That somebody might demonize you for that reaction, but that is a natural response to have, and even more natural if you decide to punch me in the face back. And I feel like so
mhm,
much of what we are told is that in situations like that, where you are literally being attacked, if you're not kind, if you're not nice, if you're not stoic, you're wrong. And so in a lot of ways, for a long time, at least, I felt therapy or like mental health resources, especially for people who are marginalized and for women, is like, this is what happened to you, and here's how it's your fault, and here's basically how you learn to dissociate better.
Oh, oh
You
my
have
God.
hysteria. You
So
know what you
powerful.
need? A bunch of orgasms. Let's ignore the fact that you are here because your husband is abusive and he just wanted a few weeks so he could fuck the maid in peace.
Mm,
Problem is
mm,
that you are hysteric and you need to, come more. You slave, you want to escape the plantation? You have drapetomania. Here's how we cure your drapetomania, but a slave wanting to escape a plantation is a natural response to being enslaved. A woman,
absolutely.
a woman being upset about the circumstances of being trapped within an unhappy, abusive marriage. That is a natural response to being trapped in a unhappy, abusive marriage. Being overwhelmed and depressed at the state of the world is a natural response to living within an increasingly fascist regime, you know? And so healing, again, getting back to how we got here, is active resistance, but only if you're doing it in such a way where you are aware of what's going on around you.
Right. Right. Oh my God. The thing you're saying it so truthfully. It's 100% um, accurate. And I wonder about the mental health spaces in the Black community. Uh, are there enough Black therapists, counselors, social workers? Is it easy to find one that is an atheist so that you could fully be yourself without fear of being judged?
I will say that I've been very fortunate in finding, excuse me, even if they didn't have my same exact sort of beliefs, just finding people who were able to create safe space for the fullness of the person that I am and be supportive of that. And so, that's the more important thing to me, because I think that for me, probably finding a person who is exactly all of my intersections of identity is probably going to be, it's the chances of that happening. But so many more therapists, I think, are getting better at providing culturally competent care. And that goes back to a bunch of DEI initiatives being able to put people who would not otherwise be able to receive that training in those spaces.
Right. Right. And now to see DEI come under such attack, I mean, it's just breathtaking. It doesn't make sense uh, to to come out against any of those things. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are the things that help make America great, and Canada and any other country. Those are really some of our strong suits, some of our strongest points. I mean, as the neighbor to the United States, being in Canada here,
Apologies.
it's a concern. It's a concern. We're worried about all of you over there. And so then I'm also wondering, as far as social media goes, because that's certainly how I found you as your voice on social media. It seems it has such tremendous potential for good and to get messages like yours out there. But sometimes it also feels like we're drowning in messages that are the opposite. White Christian nationalism, men should be in charge. Oh, like the thing I read in the New York Times the other day, are women ruining the workplace? Like just absolute nonsense. Uh, and it's so freaking tiring. I feel like it's tiring. Um, yeah. So what are your thoughts on that on social media, and how do you help your child then navigate? Because there are safer places and less safe places, but predators are everywhere. We know predators are in churches, they're in politics, they're everywhere they can be.
Yeah, so my child is not allowed social media right now
Bravo.
at all. My kid is 12. They like to animate, and so they have a TikTok where they and their friend group of like 10 people all share the animations with each other and support each other. But free scrolling through stuff. No, we don't do that. They don't have an Instagram. They don't have a Facebook, and probably won't until high school is what I'm doing. But we do have a lot of talks about media and media literacy. And that's something that I have done with my kids since birth, essentially. So, for example, we would watch Pocahontas, right? We watched the Disney movie Pocahontas and like, oh, this is cute, and then discuss Matoka, and then ask questions. If this is the real story of Matoka, why did they make Pocahontas this way? You know, if we watch Princess and the Frog, which love the music in that movie, but
Mhm.
why is the Black princess the only one that has to basically be a breadwinner? And in some ways, that is reflective of the reality. But how many actual princesses are there still? So why
Mhm.
does the white girl get to be the princess and we have to be, the hardworking, getting it out the mud? Kind of like why do you think they made that decision? Should we be giving up our dreams to live as a frog to someone that we met 2 days ago?
Right. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Why in so many Disney movies where the main protagonist is a Black person, they spend most of the movie in a dehumanized form? Or like Soul, for example. Yeah, the Black man was the body the whole time, but who was in it? Why do you think they do
Wow.
that? Why can't they and so we have those conversations. Just because media, I don't think media is neutral, but I do think it can be neutralized.
Oh.
It can be neutralized, right? And
Mhm.
my kid is obsessed with Hamilton, right? And even we have conversations on that. Like, yes, this is great and we love the music. And it is okay to love things. But should we be kind of sanitizing the fact that these are a bunch of rich white people that owned people like us? Should we be singing songs about how ethical of a being George Washington was when he was wearing dentures made of slave teeth and spent his whole life looking for this one runaway slave he had named Anna Judge, you know? And so we have those conversations too. Like, you can love what you love. And there are a lot of shows that are objectively problematic that I like because it's good TV and it's entertaining and it's an escape. But if you have to turn your brain completely off to consume it, you're going to put yourself in a real bad place. Like, escape for a while, but you got to come back to reality, baby.
Mhm. Oh, that is so, so powerful. Um, and then I wonder about, because you mentioned earlier, um, missing the community, which I absolutely understand because I feel that way too. The community that church gave, and atheists haven't really been able to replicate it. So I work with clients recovering from religious trauma, and I talk with them about the importance of building a safe, secular community for themselves. And so we talk about joining a humanist group or a skeptics group, volunteering just to be out rubbing shoulders with our neighbors and getting out and meeting people. I know there's a group called Oasis and a group called Sunday Assembly, and I think they meet all around the United States. And these are basically atheist opportunities to gather together. And I know Sunday Assembly certainly was meeting every Sunday, but it seems like it would be certainly very powerful for Black women atheists to have their own spaces where they can be talking about all these things, because you have mentioned a lot of things that are very heavy, that are feels like it's on the shoulders of Black women, or they're carrying this burden. Even when I think about the elections that have taken place, and people are saying, well, boy, we would really be hooped if it weren't for the Black women coming to the rescue, encouraging people to get out and vote.
Black women are
And
at
that
the
just
forefront of
seems,
every successful social movement in the United States.
yes,
Every single one. Like even the ones in, civil rights movement where the Black man was the face, Black women were doing the work. Black Panthers,
yes.
the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all of the work, the actual work was being done by Black women, which isn't to say Black men didn't play a role, but you cannot understate the role of Black women in social progress in any American movement. Period. I think that kind of like how Black women were, oh, I'm sorry, not Black women, Black people were sort of encouraged to go to church because they saw it as a control mechanism or a place to safely talk. Um, we sort of, the democratization that has occurred from the internet has allowed us to create those safe spaces online. And I certainly consider myself one of those spaces online where obviously everybody can see me, but the way I moderate my comments, who I choose to engage and why, what ideologies I allow to stay up in my comments, even if they're a little bit like dissenting. It all centers what I think is safe for other Black women. And not just safe from a point of like, it'll make them feel good, but like, if this is a person that I know is being racist, how can I respond to this in such a way that it'll help people like me, one, understand why this person is this way? Because I never reply to a hater or a racist or a sexist or whatever, unless I feel like it could be an educational opportunity for me to show someone why what they're saying is wrong. And I try to do that with a little bit of snark, and in super plain language. And so many people have told me that the way that I address certain things or certain ideas that they've seen have made them click for them in a way that they had never thought about before. And so I've managed to have a special talent at that because, like, again, it goes back to the idea of like ignorance isn't bliss. There are so many people that know that certain things make them feel some kind of way. What is that way? Why do I feel this way? I know this is wrong. I don't have the words for it. And I think that I have a very unique talent in finding the words for it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, unabashedly. Just let me take a look at my
Yeah,
questions again.
I'm going to stretch because this baby has decided to ball up in one little place. Move.
Oh, yes. Oh, gosh. Yeah. So, yeah, that's that baby's coming along fairly soon.
Yes, about 2 weeks.
Wow. That's boy, oh boy, I'm sure you already know to be trying to get as much sleep now as you possibly can, even though it's not terribly comfortable.
I get as much as he lets me. Like I took a little nap before this because my baby is most active between the hours of 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. and I'm hoping that does not become a trend. But yeah, he's up. And so usually so am I. And so I usually get a nap between 5 and 6:30 when I have to get my preteen up for school and then off to school. And then I have morning tasks that I do, because I am monetized on social media. So I do kind of consider it like a part-time job. So I engage my audience a little bit. And then I take a nap in the midday.
I love it.
On
You're
days
taking
that
care
I'm
of
not
yourself.
working, yeah, on days I'm not working my day job. I'm not working my day job today. I'm on leave. So
Very good. I wondered about if you could speak directly to your younger self, what would you tell her?
that's a great question. I would tell myself, you have everything you need.
Wow.
You have everything you need. Because when I think about the life that I have now and where I came from and how much of this I've accomplished with no support, no structural supports, no supports from like, family. And my biggest dream my entire life was to have a home that was mine. And I bought my home 2 years ago, you know,
Oh,
and it is
that's
mine.
wonderful.
And, nothing but, a lack of money can take it from me, And so, and then, just parenting itself is very healing for me in a lot of ways too. It's in parenting for me is an act of resistance. Every day, my kid is gender fluid, but assigned female at birth. Certainly people who look at my kid assume they identify as female and respond accordingly. We have conversations about what that means and what does
Mhm.
it mean to define yourself in the ways that you want to, you know? Um, and so parenting is an act of resistance. And, I have a assigned female child. I'm about to have an assigned male child. What is that going to be like? What does it mean to help a male child understand what it is to be a patriarchal, a beneficiary of this patriarchal power structure that we live in, but also how Blackness impacts that experience for him. And how do we create resistance within that from the other side? Um, you know, yeah. So I guess that I would tell myself that like one, you're gonna be all right. And two, you have everything that you need. I'm just gonna take
I
a
love
quick,
it.
a quick break right now.
Sure.
'Cause
Mhm.
my kid is calling me.
I'm wondering what what liberation looks like for Black women who've been raised within white Christian patriarchy.
Yeah. So definitely for me, we touched on a little bit earlier with my experience of growing up as a kid in church and having sort of natural questions about contradictions that I found within the Bible, which was being very heavily pushed down my throat and then being told very quickly, essentially not to question is what it came down to. And so definitely it's asking questions. Number one, not just believing what we're told to believe, being willing to let go of ideas or ideologies that are not serving us. Um, Even if we feel like they are a little bit serving us, going back to the idea of like the role that community can play in people staying Christian, right? How do you find that outside of that structure? You know? Um, for me, decentering men is a large part of the work that I do. And by decentering men, I just really mean decentering patriarchy, um, decentering whiteness internally. Um, this idea that we have to look and act and be a certain kind of way to be valued, to be respectable, letting go of respectability politics. Um, I don't know if you can beat that out, so I'm going to say it again. Letting go of respectability politics, um,
Mhm.
and self 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 determination and self sort of definition.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So those are the things that I would say are the biggest ways to define resistance. Um, Uppity Negress for me, in and of itself, is defining what I think liberation looks like. There is a certain place that my oppressor has decided I should be. There's a certain person that my oppressor decided I should be. And I would like them to fuck off. I'm just not going to give them that. Um, and,
Yeah.
and, and I think that there's a stark difference between liberation practice and contrarian practice, because I think that it's very easy to fall into the other. Like, for example, Kanye West originally as a political voice was George Bush, doesn't care about Black people, right? But that was more him being a contrarian than him caring about liberation. And I feel like it's a stark difference between the two that a lot of people need to learn and to truly interrogate the systems. You can't just be contrarian. You have to have a liberation based mindset and you can only have that with true critical thinking.
Excellent point. And I feel like critical thinking, for those of us who were raised in the church, can be hard to come by. It can often be, it's our responsibility to then train ourselves how to think critically, because then we were taught to totally bypass that when we were growing up in the church.
And like cognitive dissonance is a big part of that, right? And cognitive dissonance is a big part of what can be like hindrance to healing too. Because if you are not willing to say, I am willing to let go of this thing, right? When it comes to people who are being abused, who are in abusive relationships, I think that the average amount of times that they try to leave before they actually do is something like 7 the last time. And I feel like a similar thing happens with oppressive ideologies that you might hold dear. All of those times that you come really, really close in your interrogation of it to say, hey, maybe I really don't need this. Right? And a lot of these ideologies are literally abusive, right? Or they are existing within abusive systems, right? Because cults, for example, are abusive systems. How many times do cult members try to leave before they actually do? Religions are just large-scale cults.
I agree. I agree 100%. Yeah.
So I feel like that just kind of sparked something in me, making that connection between like people leaving abusive relationships and letting go of oppressive ideologies. Is literally the exact same. It is not easy to do. And a lot of the times, a lot of your resources might be wrapped up into, having believed this thing, your connections, your relationships, and letting go of it might mean losing those things. And everybody can't always do that. Right? I went to church way longer than I would have on my own because that's where the people who were paying the bills in the house that I lived were. Right? And a lot of people fall victim to that of like staying married to oppressive ideologies because they don't have any real personal benefits. Like, daddy's got to cut off the trust fund if I do, but I am privileged in that not being privileged, I didn't have any real stakes to let go of some of the things that I might have been taught to believe growing up. But it's literally exactly like existing with a partner who is emotionally, physically, financially abusive. Sometimes, for some people, depending on what the belief is. And liberation looks like realizing that and making your own kind of safe escape plan.
Wow. Yes. And you're actually making me think of another question that it feels like it's on a similar line. What do you wish white feminists would finally understand about allyship and power dynamics?
That is a good one, and it is a loaded one. So one thing people don't realize about Chicago is that Chicago is very segregated. And so pretty much all of the Black people and people of color are South, and all of the white people are North, and there's little pockets of POC of other ethnicities in between. But Chicago is very segregated, and that applies to a lot of things, social services, resources, but mostly where people live. And So I did not meet white people until I started school. And I did not have any sort of personal relationships with white
Mhm.
people until I started high school.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and so that was a little bit of a culture shock. Um, in a way that, me as a person who now knowing that I'm autistic and I just have advanced pattern recognition, like super advanced pattern recognition, white culture is very passive aggressive. White culture is very passive aggressive. And especially white women, I feel, are trained to be passive aggressive because you live in a culture
Mhm.
where being, not as demure and quiet and submissive is a lot more aggressively punished, I think, than in Black culture. Because at the end of the day, in Black culture, we still kind of need to have the option to let girls be independent because, we know at any time, even back in the day, the man could be taken out of this household and there's very little you could do about it, you know? But in white culture, there's the idea that you the white man will kind of always be stable. And so your stability is kind of tied to being able to have one, or attract one or keep one or whatever. And so male centricity, even though it is a lot in the Black community, I do feel like it is even more so rewarded in the white community. Because in the Black community, male centricity, you're considered doing great if you end up with the deadbeat. And he's just there.
Oh,
Yeah. And so the standards are very different, but the passive aggression is not something that I had ever really experienced before high school. And so learning what that was and how to have relationships with people who exhibit it, or even helping them see themselves sometimes. And this is something that, my best friend that I mentioned earlier, we met in a group home. Um, we talk about this all the time, just kind of different ways that we were raised culturally. And that is the biggest difference for me. And so for allyship with white women, I think it first starts with fundamentally understanding that we communicate differently. And the way that Black women communicate is not wrong just because it's different. It's not aggressive just because we're different. And there's a difference between assertive and aggressive. And so much of the angry Black woman trope, I feel, is directly related to the fact that we are not culturally passive aggressive. As you've noted multiple times throughout this conversation, is I have a way of just saying it, right? And it may be blunt sometimes, depending on how I want to phrase myself, but most of the times it's simply direct, right? It just
yes.
cuts to the point of the issue. And I'm usually saying things rather unemotionally, right? But if you go through my comments and you notice trends among how white people and white women specifically perceive my words, a lot of it will be assuming that I'm angry or that I'm mad or that I'm upset. And there's a
Mhm.
lack of distinction between passion and negative emotion.
Right.
And so white women unpacking that cultural passive aggression just by itself, I think would do a lot of good in improving their communications with Black women. And then drawing back to the idea of abusive relationships, of course, there's always going to be the if you are familiar with The Handmaid's Tale, which at this point everybody is because it's no longer kind of fringe due to the show, but some white women are Serena Joy. They are very much so gung ho because they think that patriarchy is what it is until they learn that it's not. It would do so much for gender relations between Black women and white women if white women realize that the marginal benefits that you will get from patriarchy will never pay out as much as resisting it all.
Wow.
And even if you feel, and the same kind of goes for, black people, or especially black men who kind of play into white nationalist ideology, right? Like, yes, you may get some head pats, and yes, you might end up with a nice husband and a good house. And no, he can no longer send you to the sanitarium and say that you're hysterical. But it's if that's really what you want and you get it, great. But as we know, most people in those dynamics are not actually genuinely happy. If they were, the divorce rate wouldn't be what it was, and white men wouldn't be trying to repeal no-fault divorce, and trying to figure out ways to keep their wives economically trapped with them. All of these feminist policies that we have existed because white women who actually had power realized at some point that they were not working. And we got to such a point in feminism that's just kind of like a breaking point of like, yeah, everything's so great right now that I fucking forgotten how bad it was. White women who were housewives in the 60s that you like to idealize were doped up on benzos because they were so deeply unhappy with their lives. And also, they were not actually doing all the work because they probably had somebody like me in the background. And so you are creating a life for yourself where you're going to have that same level of unhappiness, but your husband can no longer afford a woman like me to do the work for you. So, I mean, if that is what you feel is what you want, then I love that for you, boo. But none of you triad wife creators on the internet are putting up your content for free. So I feel like deep down on the inside, that being completely economically dependent on a man is not actually where it's at.
It's a terrible idea. Let me just say.
So that would be the second thing. It's just not idealizing white patriarchy. And if I had to say something else in terms of like allyship is something that I deal with a lot is white women don't realize how often they white-splain. White women don't realize how often they white-splain, and there are so many conversations where I'll be having a productive, nuanced conversation, and a white woman just assumes that she knows more about the topic than me. And even like I could be talking about my own diabetes and how I have a specialized form of diabetes, and a white woman will come and say, "But have you considered eating less sugar?" And it's like,
oh my God.
I literally have to preface so many of my posts with, I don't need your advice or solutions, because I personally only discuss things that I'm fully knowledgeable about in a way that like you're probably not going to be more knowledgeable than me unless you have like specialized academic studies of this thing, which that's not everybody. I have to specifically say no unsolicited advice or suggestions. But the people who always think they have a sparkling, special insight that I've never heard to ask. It is almost always a white woman. And even if I turn off the comments on the post, because I'm getting too much unsolicited feedback like that, and that realm of, hi, you don't know this, and I do here, they will message it to me.
Oh my God.
And so for me, that's a big barrier too, because I don't think many of them realize that they're kind of sort of saying, I automatically assume that you don't know what you're talking about and you need me to come in and fix it. And even if that's not meant maliciously, what does your conversation as a white woman look like with Black women if you assume we're knowledgeable, especially when you again consider every successful social movement in the United States has been successful because of Black women.
Huh?
what does your interactions look like with us if you assume that we are experts at things? And I try not to really hammer that one too much just because it annoys me to have to hammer it too much. But that is a big issue that causes a lot of times I will just straight up turn off the comments. The discussion is over. It's enough. Like,
Mhm.
and so that is a big barrier of communication for me with white women. In particular, it's just this expectation that I am not knowledgeable and that they need to make me more knowledgeable with their special white woman insight on whatever. And it is
Course.
always the most basic Google AI overview shit you've ever heard in
Mhm.
your life.
Oh my
And if
God.
you're assuming that I don't know that, you're assuming I don't know what I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right. So
Uh,
offensive.
yeah, and
Wow.
it does get very offensive because again, I'm kind of a genius, and so people, and so you assuming a lack of intelligence that doesn't exist, a lack of knowledge that doesn't exist, is kind of inherently offensive to me. And if I explain that to every single white woman who did that to me, I would never have time to post anything else.
Yes. Yes. Well, hopefully many thousands of them will tune into this podcast. They will take what you've said and really take it to heart. I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to speak with me and share these insights. I do want to know how we can support you in the work that you do.
Yeah, so I started a small business a few months ago. It is uppitynegriss.com. I basically create like resources, personal growth resources, where essentially I have journals where they are progressive reflection journals. So I have a few titles out already. One is called the Boundaries Bible. And I think that that is the best starting point because so many women in general, and I would say even more so white women, are taught to be people pleasers with no boundaries. And
Mhm,
certainly they don't know how to recognize and respect boundaries in others. And
mhm.
so that's always a really, really great starting point. From there, I have a title called Decentering Men. And that is my personal favorite one. I put so much love into that one. And going back to the idea of patriarchy being an abusive relationship, I put so much love and compassion into that I feel like I don't necessarily do in my everyday interactions just because there's certain kinds of emotional labor that I'm not willing to give on a constant basis for free. So like if you're a woman and you're a pick me or not like other girls, or you have a lot of internalized sexism, I'm probably not gonna coddle it or have space for it in my comments. You know where all of the space in my heart is for those women? It's in decentering men. It's in decentering men.
Nice.
Because again, I understand that like what we're taught about patriarchy is that it's a good thing and that men are going to take care of us, and everything bad that happens to a woman by a man must be her own fault. And so there is a level of empathy that I have for people who have bought into that, but it's also harmful, and so I cannot let you spread harm in my space. But all of the love that I have and all the compassion that I have for women who are really struggling through that and want to do better
Yeah,
is in
yeah.
decentering men. I have a praxis that I came up with called labor diggers. And it is a word to describe sort of like fourth wave feminism is what I think all of these conversations on domestic labor and how it's split based on where we are in our society right now. And there's a specialized kind of man who thinks that basically all domestic labor should be on the woman. And basically his role is to just have a paycheck, even if she just also has a paycheck. And so I call them labor diggers. And so it also has a lot of great information on spotting and avoiding those men. And I am trademarking that term because I'm the person that coined it. And so that trademark
It's great.
is in process. And then I have another one called Decentering Whiteness. And I have two versions of that one. One is for white people and one is for Black people. And so often I find there are a lot of white people in my comments where they genuinely want to do better and be better and to unpack the machinations of whiteness, but they just don't know how. And I cannot do that on an individual basis with every single white person that comes into my comments. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that's what decentering whiteness is. And also, I feel like so much of the resources around decentering whiteness just really center shame and guilt. And I also put a lot of compassion into decentering whiteness on both sides too, because again, this is an abusive relationship. Like, and even more so with whiteness, like you don't even realize the ways that one, you're being abused, but also taught to be abusive in ways that you
Mhm.
don't even recognize. And so there's a lot of love and compassion in there that you would not necessarily see in my comments because I cannot give my social media reaches 100 million people a month. I cannot
Wow.
I cannot give 100 million people that level of of personalized compassion on a daily, on a monthly basis. And so the journals have really turned out to be a great outlet for me to give those resources to people who see me as an expert or a person that they would come to. Because people do come to me a lot. Hey, Kiki, I saw your post on da da da. I agree. What can I do about it? I get a message like that at least every day. I cannot every day draft a message that says, hey, all of these things. But decentering whiteness exists for that. I have decentering heteronormativity, which is basically just about um, sexism and sexuality, gender identity, how all of those play into sexist and racist systems as well. Body policing, body autonomy. Everything that we're seeing with like trans bans in legislation, and how to contextualize that in the context of our whole society. And also heal kind of like your internalized homophobia and transphobia, and confront it. And so if you're a person out there and you want a kind of no nonsense, loving auntie to politely bonk you on the head and help you do better about being a better person in those specific ways, I have those resources on uppity And again, I put a lot of love into them because at the end of the day, I do love humanity. I know that it's very easy these days to be like misanthropic, but I love humans. And I do believe that on some level, we kind of all try, right? And if you're a person who's trying and you're willing to put in the work, that's my way of meeting you halfway.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much. You've given tremendous food for thought in our conversation and also obviously with the resources. I can't wait actually to go to your website and avail myself of some of those resources. They sound wonderful. So uppity is the best way that people can get your resources, and they can certainly follow you on social media, also as Uppity Negress. Any closing thoughts?
Um, no, you know what? I think that we have covered so much great things today that I don't even really have any closing thoughts. This is just a pleasure of a conversation.
Oh, I feel the same way, and I'm so glad you do. And I wish you a very good health moving forward, as if you got your next addition to your family coming shortly. So I truly hope all goes well. And thank you so much for joining me on the Sex and Power podcast.
Thank you for having me, Janice.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
Sex and power.